Hello, stat students. In part 2 of 3.2a, I'm going to show you how to interpret a regression line and put in data values, calculate the regression line, and graph it. So the first thing we want to do before we start anything so that we can end up getting the correlation, so r and r squared for future use, is we are going to press second, and you want to do this also so you can have this on your calculator for the rest of the school year. So go to second and hit 0. If you hit 0, you'll see a catalog pop up, and you want to, like, you can type in the letter D on your keyboard, or you can scroll down and go all the way down until you see Diagnostics on, and you want to make sure that's on. And if it's already on, that's great, but it's always good to double check. So hit enter. Mine's on. I'm going to hit done. I'm good to go. Okay, the next thing you want to do is you want to enter your data in a list. So you want to enter your explanatory variable, which is your x variable, in list 1, and you want to enter your response variable in list 2. That's your y variable. So go to stats, go to edit, and then if you notice here, this is our example that we're going to do. The information you see here is the number of miles driven and advertised price for 11 used Honda CR-Vs from the 2002-2006 model years. And this is on your example page for 3.2a. So column 1 is your explanatory variable, and it's in thousands of miles. So 22,000, 29,000, 35,000, so on. And list 2 is the cost. So the cost for a car Honda CVR with 22,000 miles is $17,998, and $16,450, and so on. And so I have all that in there to save us time. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to calculate a linear regression. So we want to go to stat, and we want to go to calculate, but we don't want one variable statistics because that's only for your 5-number summary. So we want to go to, now notice if you look at number 4 and then you look at number 8, they're very similar. But in stats, we like it in a certain form, so we're going to choose number 8. And I'll talk about it later when we're finishing up our notes. So we want to go to LinReg, and that's a plus bx, where b is your slope, a is your y-intercept. And I will talk about that later also. Hit enter. And make sure that your list 1 and list 2 correspond to your X list and Y list. Mine do, but I had it changed from last time because it was L5 when we were calculating something else. So list 1, list 2. Storing a regression equation is great if you have that option in a newer calculator. And in order to do that, you want to, and these directions are on your paper, you go to alpha, and you go to trace, which is up here on the very top row, and I'm going to store it in Y1. Now these are those Y1 through Y10 are those equations that you use for Algebra 2 to put in your equations before you want to graph it. So I'm going to store it in Y1. And I noticed before I even started, my Y equals was all empty. And then I'm going to go down and calculate. And you can skip frequency list. We don't do that until we get to probability. And there is our linear regression equation. And so you have these values. They don't really mean anything to you right now, but I'll describe them. So A is your y-intercept. It's $18,773.28. B is your slope. It's negative 86.18. And there's your r squared. We will talk about that later in our chapter. And then r is our correlation. It's a negative correlation. It's a strong negative correlation at 0.87. And let's see, let's go ahead and graph this. So in order to graph it, we want to make a scatter plot. So we can't just select a graph. We're not going to get anything there. And this is what would happen. Well, I guess we do have something, but it doesn't have the dots. So what you want to do is you want to go to second, y equals, because that'll pull up the stat plots menu. And you want to make sure stat plot 1 is on. So I'm going to hit on. Last time I used stat plots, I made a modified box plot, but this time I want to scroll to that first blinking one, and that is a scatter plot. Once you hit scatter plot, it automatically knows that you need 2 quantitative variables one in the X list, one in the Y list. So X list corresponds to your explanatory, Y list corresponds to your response. Okay, and now you can just, you could just hit graph at this point. And because I stored that linear regression equation, it plotted the line. If I didn't, it would just show me the dots. So here it shows the regression line. And now if you go to trace, you can actually see at 22,000 miles, the cost was 17,998, and you can just scroll and it'll give you the individual. Now, we haven't talked about it there, but it says 35,000 miles, the cost is 14,998. Well, what if, oops, didn't mean to do that. Okay, so here is the predicted value. So there you're over predicting instead of under predicting. And that's if we rounded that to 35,000 miles. So just to kind of give you an idea, the trend line versus the actual points from the scatter plot. And then we will, I think I have everything I want to with this particular graph until we go to the back of our notes. So right now I just wanted to show you how to calculate the least squares regression equation. So that would be under stat, calculate. It would be number 8. You want it in the form, you want the linear regression equation, and you want it in the form a plus bx. So you select 8, and then make sure your prompts are L1, L2, or wherever you put your information. You don't have to store the regression equation. If for some reason you have a TI-83 and not a TI-84 or better, there's another way to store a regression equation instead of hitting alpha trace. And the directions are on your notes, but you would hit vars. You would go scroll over to Y vars. You would stay on number 1 function. And then here you would get to Y1. So you have to go through a few more steps, but you would get there eventually, and then go to calculate. So that is it as far as looking at the information. Now let's interpret those values, the R, the A value, and I'm going to go back there and pull those up for you so you have a chance to write them down in your notes. Oops. So we are interested in A, B, and R at this point. So to write A, go ahead and write that as 18,773.28. B is negative 86.18. And R is negative 0.87. And we are going to write those down on the bottom of our notes in part 3 of our video. So I will see you in part 3.